Now, the federal government has renewed the suspension of commercial flights from Niger Republic to Nigeria and from Nigeria to the nation's northern neighboring country by the Economic Community of West African States resolution. This resolution was put forth by ECOWAS in response to the event of the Niger Republic on July 26, 2023, when the democratically elected President Mohamed Bazoum was ousted in a coup and replaced by the military junta led by General Abdourrahamane Tchiani. On the other hand, the West African Foreign Ministries held an emergency meeting on Thursday in Nigeria's capital, Abuja, to discuss the political crisis in Senegal and disputes with military rulers in 3 other member states. The extraordinary session of the Economic Community of West African States, the ECOWAS, follows President Macky Sall's sudden decision to delay elections in Senegal just a week after Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger declared that they were quitting the bloc. Let's not forget there is also Guinea on that list. Now, ECOWAS has urged Senegal, one of its most stable member states, to return to its election timetable, but critics have already questioned the group's sway over increasingly defiant member states. We have with us a retired diplomat with the ECOWAS Commission Abuja and a deputy county or country chair of the United Nations Economic and Social Council, Ambassador Haruna Ali Warkani, to discuss the matters arising between the Senegal, Niger, and the ECOWAS. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, viewers.
It's good to have you. So let's talk about, this thing happening. I mean, there is, on one hand, there is this celebration of, okay, ECOWAS is about to complete 50 years, of the bloc being in existence. And we've seen the positive thing the bloc has made, for West Africa. But then, on the other hand, there's this challenging thing happening with ECOWAS that it seemed as though they are losing their grip on power, and people are a bit skeptical, if at all, in the long run there will be any need for ECOWAS. What is your take on all of this, Ambassador?
Well, thank you, viewers. It's quite unfortunate that we are having challenges at the verge of realizing the 50-year anniversary. The founding fathers of ECOWAS had very lofty ideals of what should be in line with the African Union, or what was used to be OAU's intention to have regional blocs across the whole continent of Africa, integrating themselves region by region and then gradually forming into a continental body to make up for one African government. And so it is something that is sincerely beyond just ECOWAS. It's a continental move. Over the years, 75 to now, ECOWAS has achieved a lot in so many areas of integration. However, in the areas of governance, it has proven very difficult and challenging, from the security challenges of the 90s, resulting into the formation of ECOMOG and interventions in Sierra Leone, Liberia, Guinea-Bissau, and so many other places, to what we are also witnessing today, the breakaway of some members, breakaway without even notice. They woke up to say, today we are leaving, and we are living in protest because we are no longer happy that the ideals for which the founding fathers saw is like no longer being realized. Now, it becomes very difficult when members of any community, family, or group willingly say they are no longer doing. It becomes very difficult. Now, if we look back at the communique issued by these countries who threatened to leave, you will see very important things challenging the integrity, the loss of zeal, power, focus, and perceived interference in member states' affairs were very prominent. Now, observations have been made severally that, yes, ECOWAS seems to be losing the grip, because if you are having more and more countries coming under military coups. It becomes very disturbing. And this doesn't seem to have an end, because it looks like so many other countries are potentially preparing to join such a club. Now, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, in that order, you could see all overthrew their civilian governments and instituted military governments. And once a military coup succeeds by way of installing a military government, they acquire legitimacy, whichever way you want it. They exercise sovereignty over the territory that they control. And therefore, it becomes very difficult for ECOWAS to dictate to these countries. That's why when sanctions were imposed on these countries as a result of the military coup, and then these sanctions began to bite, these countries responded by saying, look, we still remain a country with sovereignty and a military government. You either tolerate us and we talk to each other, or we block each other and it becomes another matter, which is what has resulted into the exit of these countries. And today, with 3 member countries formally exiting the community, yes, it's very worrisome, particularly at a time. And the events in Senegal is also pointing to a similar situation, because what is happening is like we are gradually getting to a point where Macky Sall, the current president, seems to be creating a dynasty for himself. He might transit 1 year extension, from 1 year to another year extension, and if care is not taken.
I mean, there is no specific date on, postponing the election.
No,
but Ambassador, I would want us to dissect each situation first. So let's talk about Niger before we come to Senegal political crisis.
Good.
So in Niger right now, we saw how ECOWAS, threatened with sanctions, saying there would be a lot of decision made, and we all know ECOWAS strength comes with the trade sanctions, cutting off a lot of things to Niger. But even at that, even with the hardship that it caused for both Nigeria and Niger when it comes to the trade relationship, the military junta are still hell-bent on what they want to do. So at this point now, we're looking for the way forward, for the West African continent. So what do you think, what is the overview of the situation? What is it looking like?
Well, the sanctions, which includes the no commercial flight and trade sanctions, movement of people and the rest of them, sincerely, for Nigeria as a national interest and Niger, that is to say, reducing the crisis now to bilateral levels. Nigeria is not doing well, because we are unable as a country to disaggregate the difference between being a member of ECOWAS and now, unfortunately, being in the leadership position of ECOWAS. I think that's where the problem is. There should be a national interest of Nigeria different from the bloc interest of Nigeria in ECOWAS. It seems this position has not been appropriately disaggregated to enable appropriate actions also be taken. For instance, the disconnection of electricity supply to Niger by Nigeria has and should have nothing to do with ECOWAS crisis. If ECOWAS as a bloc decides to impose sanctions on Niger, Nigeria as a neighbor to Niger should have no right to disconnect electricity supply to Niger.
But Nigeria did it based on, being a member of the ECOWAS.
Yes.
Isn't that them,
That's where the problem is.
Okay.
Electricity supply to Niger had nothing to do with ECOWAS.
Okay.
Electricity supply to Niger was and is a bilateral agreement, an international agreement between ECOWAS, between Nigeria as a country and Niger as a country, minding that when Nigeria was to build the dams at Kainji, it's on the river Niger that passes through Niger before emptying its waters into the ocean. Now, technically it means if Niger were to build another dam upstream on the same river Niger, our dam in Kainji and Jeba might probably not exist. So because of that, an understanding was reached to say, okay, we are going to build the dam and share the electricity with you.
So it was a give and take.
Not to build another dam on the river Niger. Therefore, it's a bilateral agreement. It preceded ECOWAS. And so we really don't have a right, technically and legally, to say we are disconnecting supply because there was a problem. That's why we need to segregate this from the overall ECOWAS issues that came up. Flight disruptions for now is equally almost on the same verge because it's a bilateral air agreement between ECOWAS, between Nigeria and Niger.
So right now it's looking like ECOWAS is using Nigeria to attack Niger.
Very, very surely. And I think the Ministry of Foreign Affairs needs to sit back and look at this very carefully because it's unthinkable that any other member country would have sacrificed its national pride, national interest for the sake of the bloc to do what Nigeria is doing. So
Ambassador, in all this that you're saying, it's not looking favorable for Nigeria and Niger. So what would the impact be, for these two countries in the long haul if situations should continue like this?
Well, Nigeria loses largely because, you see, the relationship between Nigeria and Niger transcends what people generally see. Throughout the insurgency that we've been suffering in this country, Niger had more or less acted like a buffer between the terrorists operating generally in the Sahel and Nigeria. Don't forget, we share the longest borderline with all other member countries in the sub-region: Benin, Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon. We share the longest borderline, stretching from around Kebbi right to Maiduguri, Borno State. This is the longest borderline between two member countries. Nigeria and Niger have been very friendly countries. So friendly to a point where even the alphabet brought us together such that when you go to international conferences, we are next to each other because of spelling of our names. And we have enjoyed this kind of relationship that should have been treated separately. Even if we're taking steps to assist ECOWAS to enforce sanctions, Nigeria needs to take precaution because as we speak, you still have Nigerian refugees living in Niger as a result of Boko Haram attacks. Over 300,000 right now.
We've seen some of them return home.
Yeah, well, some have been returning home, but as a result of long stay since 2009, some have decided even to stay permanently. So there is a special relationship which should not be lost on our foreign policy position. And it's important because the flight relationship that we have with Niger is pretty special because we enjoy a kind of privilege between the two countries. They come here, we go there. Trade has been booming between the two countries, speaking the same language, exercising cultural ties, traditions, and affinities that you cannot separate. Indeed, there is hardly a borderline between Nigeria and Niger in the north. Therefore, you have these special considerations. The Foreign Affairs Ministry, therefore, needs to sincerely segregate the national interest of the country vis-a-vis the collective interest of ECOWAS itself as a bloc. And with this, we might be able to forge forward and even seek for solutions that might be easier to do. Now, even in the context of ECOWAS itself, if Nigeria were to play a slightly different role, this crisis would have been de-escalated. But if Nigeria remains and takes steps as it is taking now, it will only enrage fears within the ruling elite in Niger, which makes it difficult. And I tell you, they are at pains to see that this is happening because the cordial, historical, and fraternal relationship that has been enjoyed between those two countries is very difficult to measure.
So if I should get what you're saying, you seem to believe that Nigeria should be the tool that ECOWAS will use in softening Niger in order to at least listen to them.
Definitely.
All right. We hope that the ECOWAS will do that. But then moving away from Niger, let's talk about Senegal now. We saw President Macky Sall, postponing elections to, we don't know the future date. And it's already causing a lot of unrest with not only the ECOWAS, but other international bodies coming out to advise him to, take caution and just remain with the same election timetable. So how do you think this is, or should I say, how do you think ECOWAS is taking all of this at the same time when there is the threats from Mali, from, I think, Chad, with all of this, and even Guinea exiting the ECOWAS bloc?
Well, it's pretty unfortunate that ECOWAS has to find itself here. Nobody expected that this is the time for exit of any member state. The first exit historically was Mauritania in the year 2000, for obvious reasons of some ethnic considerations and some other political insinuations. Now, successful or not, Mauritania left. And it left ECOWAS with 15 instead of 16 member countries. Now, the exit of the 3 members of the Alliance of Sahel States, as they call themselves today, has become more than worrisome. And it's also a pointer of what perhaps internally is happening within the ECOWAS as itself. More countries are finding it difficult to continue to appreciate the ideals of the founding fathers. And this is due to largely the result or impacts of bad governance.
From the ECOWAS, from the bloc?
No, from member states.
Okay.
Good. A lot of member states, people get elected, in quotes, into offices that remains questionable. That is to say, the vehicle for elections have remained very questionable. And because of that, you have agitations of people not enjoying the dividends of democracy. And in that regard, you see agitations. And when people protest, which is supposed to be legitimate in a democratic setting, the response by the authorities usually will be police going out to shoot people. Now, with that, you have created a scenario where it becomes legitimate for the military to perhaps intervene to save the state from itself. When that happens, ECOWAS says you have violated the protocols of good governance and democracy. And for that reason, you need to have sanctions imposed on such a country. You cannot recognize a military ruler to sit within the ECOWAS confines of meetings. And these sanctions normally bite. These sanctions, too, bite the poor more than the ruling elites. Indeed. And so, in most cases, the rulers will be up there. Yes, they see, they hear, but they don't feel. Citizens feel these sanctions more. And for them, they are not even part of it. They are also victims of misgovernance. And so, you see, it's a complex setting that ECOWAS needs to sit back and look at it again this time, to say, okay, perhaps there should be a different approach to all this. And what we are seeing evolving in Senegal is clear sign of creating a dynasty, a monarchy evolving. One day we might have King Macky Sall, with all due respect. This is what happened in Cameroon. You have someone ruling for 40 years. This was what happened in Gabon until the military were able to remove the Bongo families. This is what is happening in Togo. You have the Nasimbe, the Adema family, having been in control of the country since independence, except the brief interregnum of Olympio. You have events like this in so many countries, such that normally politicians will come and tell you elections have been postponed. Create reasons why these elections are postponed. Most times, they would have bought over the parliament, like we can see what is happening in Senegal. Members who objected to the postponement of elections and extension of tenure were forcefully removed from the parliament.
And let's not forget the cut from telecommunication, where nobody was able to make.
Well, of course, normally, as state actors, they have access to so many things, instruments of power. They exercise it ruthlessly, because there was no reason for police, the gendarmerie, to enter the parliament and forcefully remove people because they disagreed with the government.
Indeed, Ambassador. Ambassador, with all of this happening now, that is the question. West Africa seems to be suffering a lot, you know, from all of this, from the citizens, and also ECOWAS is deep into this confusion of what to do. So you have been with these people, you know how these things work. What do you think is the best solution in order to avert all of this happening at the same time for West Africa?
Well, it should have been a stronger ECOWAS, a more proactive ECOWAS, not only be seen.
How so? How can they be proactive?
Okay. If you take the issues in Senegal today, the statement issued by ECOWAS is like concern and encourages, mark the word, encourages the country to return to constitutionalism. That's not enough. This should be the time that ECOWAS should instantly convene an extraordinary meeting, specifically on such a country only, for violating the protocol provisions on democracy and good governance. Because it's a clear case of, here is someone who, because he is your member, head of state of a member country, has decided through the back door to extend his tenure by about a year. Because what the parliament has given is like, okay, elections can be extended by 1 year, which means his tenure is already extended by 1 year. ECOWAS should not simply pass a resolution. This is a time for real action. Go into that country and ask the Mr. President in a meeting and tell him in clear terms. It's more than just resolution or observation or encouragement or whatever. No. This is the time to correct such a thing. And let the citizens of West Africa also see that, yes, ECOWAS is doing something practical. Rather than wait until this situation degenerates by constant protest on the streets of the country. And in that regard, lives will be lost. Ultimately, the military might not sit back and watch all these things happen without taking any action. And when they take action, it means the civilian government will be removed and replaced by a military government. When that happens, you impose sanctions on the country. And like I said earlier, sanctions don't work for the rulers. Sanctions affect the poor. Now, we can engage more in preventive diplomacy than the curative approaches that normally follows. Once you have a military government, it becomes much more difficult because you can't even talk to that military government. They are not willing to listen.
Exactly. Talking to them and not willing to listen. Ambassador, we saw how the back and forth has been going on between the ECOWAS and Niger. And you know, other member country exiting the bloc also are affected, and they say they feel not represented. So even with this meeting that was done yesterday in the Federal Capital Territory, also there was no representation from the other ones that threatened to exit, you know, Burkina Faso, Mali, and the rest. But we saw someone from Senegal representing in that meeting. But don't you think that it's because the members are seeing that the ECOWAS are not really doing much in terms of the military ruled country, and that is why Macky Sall, you know, is bringing this rebelliousness, because he knew this reaction, of course, will emanate from the bloc. Yeah. So don't you think that the hold, the grip of the bloc, it's falling, it's failing because of how they see the way they handle other states that have, you know, brought or showed rebellious behaviors? In
fact, Senegal will be like, let me say, a political laboratory for ECOWAS and its citizens. Because now, how ECOWAS precisely handles Senegal's case will tell whether it is a fair and just organization or otherwise. Now, coups are not necessarily military. Coups can also be civilian, which is what we are witnessing now. Right now, the provisions of the ECOWAS Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance has been impinged upon by Senegal, which means there was a civilian coup in Senegal. Because for anybody to extend the tenure, which is constitutionally provided for, means there has been a military, a civilian coup. Now, with a civilian coup, ECOWAS should not have welcomed the delegation from Senegal, because automatically it means Senegal too should be on sanctions. Senegal should be barred from ECOWAS meetings. Let it be made to sink that, Mr. President, you have done it, you've done it wrongly, and we will not tolerate this. Otherwise, the three brothers, Niger, Burkina, and Mali, will find justification to say, hey, we told you ECOWAS is unfair. ECOWAS is unjust. That's why today there is a civilian coup in Senegal, and they are still meeting a delegation of that country. That is very difficult for ECOWAS to handle, I know, but ECOWAS needs to think and act differently.
But experts are suggesting that it's too quick, you know, for them to sanction Senegal, considering, you know, the decision was made just recently. I mean, we saw how before they even sanctioned Niger, it took a bit of time negotiating with them. But then, Ambassador, do you think right now the ECOWAS needs to retract, you know, backtrack and go back to the negotiation table with the military-ruled countries before they decide to deal with the Senegal situation?
Well, very well. Very, very well. There are two layers, even more, in diplomacy. The open and the covert. Covertly, ECOWAS should be talking to the military rulers.
Are they willing to do?
No, well, they may not be willing to do.
No, I meant the juntas.
Oh yes, the junta will be willing to talk covertly. Most times, in the context of diplomacy, what is discussed, how it is discussed, and by whom might not necessarily need to be known. What is paramount is the result. The military rulers in this country surely and normally feel ostracized. They normally feel a need to belong. They will normally feel a need to do certain things differently. But to come out openly also and say, we are sorry or something, it becomes a problem. So in conflict resolutions, ordinarily there should have been subterranean diplomatic moves, which will include the use of the offices of the wise, the Council of the Wise, which ECOWAS has as a text, and then unofficial means of access to these people. They must have friends, they must have good ties with some people and some countries, including countries that are outside of the sub-region. Quietly behind the scene, some of these things can be done. Look, we remain a family. The threat of the use of military, for instance, the invasion of Niger, was wrong, very, very wrong. You could use it as a threat, but to go to the extent of maybe taking a decision by the military rulers, and the military chiefs, that is to say the only thing that was not known that time was the date of the invasion.
When it would happen.
Good, but almost everything was done as to say, tomorrow we are likely going to invade this country. Now, the ECOWAS standby force, which is supposed to be a rapid response mechanism to attend to matters like this, should have been activated, not against member countries who have internal problems, but should be between member countries, should there be any conflagration or issues of maybe territorial integrity being questioned or something. That's when the standby force supposedly should be used. Now, in situations like this, Senegal, for instance, should know that the current happenings is not acceptable. The parliament has gone against itself. The parliament has gone against the government and people, because Macky Sall has succeeded in literally pocketing this parliament. And that is where now ECOWAS proactive action needs to be taken now, not too many meetings, resolutions, no. Before you know it, Macky Sall would have consolidated his position with a walk-away 1-year tenure. And before you know it, the parliament, those who have been identified now to be against him, would have been removed, would be punished or ostracized, disregarded, and you see a totally divided parliament that can no longer work. The remaining members who are with him would be reinforced by way of inducements and what have you, and then before you know it, you have a kind of unitary system that there are no checks and balances. And once that happens, you have cleared the coast for Macky Sall to declare himself a monarch, and you now have a dynasty instead of a statutory republic.
It's a really dire situation here on this matter. And honestly, we don't envy ECOWAS. But then, Ambassador, quick one. On the long run, do you see ECOWAS overcoming these hurdles?
We remain optimistic that ECOWAS could overcome this. But it requires also proactive thinking and action. Proactive thinking in the sense that what used to be like solutions are no longer applying this time around, and therefore there has to be new rejigging of all the steps that are normally taken in such circumstances. Because now, you see, the situation in Guinea is as a result of tenure extension. Good. Alpha Conde, from all nooks and crannies of the country, so clearly that his tenure has ended. He refused to go. And protests erupted. The military came out, quelled the riots, killed some people, and the citizens said, no, this cannot continue. The riots continued, and then the military came and took him out and then installed themselves. Now, fears are that a country like Guinea might join the alliance of Sahel states, making it 4. Togo is boiling. Togo has receded into a dynasty no longer political. ECOWAS is not doing anything. Benin might be quiet, but there are simmering concerns in the country as well.
So with all of this, there is more scare to this situation. So it boils back to what you said from the beginning, good governance.
Yes.
Our leaders need to remove greed and just do their best, put their people first, civilians and all that, in order to make sure that the people are okay. When the people are okay, of course, there won't be the military option. Well, we hope that we see positive results in the future that would favor every member of ECOWAS and the citizens in general. Thank you so much, Ambassador Haruna Ali Warkani, retired diplomat with the ECOWAS Commission, Abuja, and a deputy country chair of the United Nations Economic and Social Council. Thank you so much for your time and your insight.
Thank you, viewers, and thank you for having me.
Of course.